involved in teaching and has, to her credit, been blacklisted by several colleges and universities because she is a conservative.
Yes.
All right, and I want to leave you with this thought. We hear about the liberal professors in colleges and universities nationwide, right? It's a crisis, as Donald Trump might say. It's a crisis. But you have to think back to root cause analysis in manufacturing. Root cause analysis, that's where you determine what the real problem is. You do a root cause analysis and you find out it's the governors. The governors appoint the Board of Regents. They appoint the university professors, except sometime when the governor wants to do it just out, like he appointed Sam Olin instead of president of Kennesaw. The governors have the power, and that's because, and nobody ever calls them on it. Nobody has ever, I've never heard any newscast, any commentator call out the governors. But it's the governors, and we need to start holding them accountable for the liberal professors on state-run campuses. And our previous governor never called out Kennesaw or any of the other campuses that had free speech zones in this 12-foot area, or is it 6-foot area, or 2-foot area. So, but we have to hold these people accountable. Absolutely have to hold them accountable. We have to think about what's going on. And with that, Christina is one of those thinkers.
Thank you very much, Michael.
And thank you for being here.
Michael was a very good guest in my guest lecture. When Sean Hannity came to my class, he just took it over. You just go and sit over there. I've got this. I had an ex-communist professor in college. I was a refugee from Vassar College, and I went to a little college in Plano, Texas, run by Robert Morris. And my government teacher was Bella Dodd. And my economics teacher was Ludwig von Mises. And I had other excellent teachers. And when I came to Kennesaw State, I had to sign an oath that I was not a communist. Isn't that great?
When I became a citizen, they asked me if I ever been a communist.
Yeah, right. I bet they don't do that anymore.
Or a member of the John Birch Society, right?
Right.
Right.
Young person, right.
With Brendan, that was an asset on his resume in applying to the CIA.
Of course. Of course. When history became social studies and government became civics, much of our society became dumber, knowing less about the history of this country, less about the Constitution, less about the Declaration, but more about football. As a result, many of our citizens are not acquainted with a lot of the provisions in the Constitution. And some find some of them very confusing. And they're, because I guess of the fluoride in the water, they are easily confused. One of the newly confusing constitutional provisions is the natural born citizen clause in Article 2, Section 1, Clause 5. Where the Constitution sets forth the eligibility requirements to be president. Bad education is part of it, but some of it is politically motivated confusion. The founders' intention was to include the vice president in these provisions. What are they? Natural born citizen. What is a natural born citizen? Two parents, and the child is born within the borders of the United States. Why is that natural? Because they can't be anything but. If your parents are of the nation, and you are born in the nation, no other nation can claim you. If you are born in another nation, that nation can claim you. You can be, people have found themselves in Israel, called up for the Israeli army. That's happened in Germany. That country has a claim on you, and you should have renounced that dual citizenship. It's very much discouraged by the State Department. But people brag about it. Oh, I've got a passport from here, a passport from there. My sister married somebody named Samosa, though. She really held on to her U.S. passport. And they told her to keep her maiden name in there, too. The origin of the natural-born citizen debate, as it's been conducted in the last 10, 15 years, started in 2003, when members of Congress began to try to pass amendments. You know, the beginning of the normal amendment process is Congress passes an amendment. And that's something the president doesn't have to sign. The effort was to get rid of the natural-born citizen requirement. They fooled around with some of the other ones, you know, make it 12 years instead of 14 years a citizen, that kind of thing. But the main thing was to get rid of that. So people like John McCain, who was questionable, and Arnold Schwarzenegger, who was not questionable, absolutely was not a natural-born citizen, could be made eligible. The origin of the reason that the founders included the natural-born citizen clause was because they lived in a time when there was international intrigue, kind of like the times that we're living in. And since time immemorial, nations, especially rich, powerful nations, were particularly vulnerable to spies and infiltrators. The founders had well-founded concerns that Britain or her allies might try to place a usurper among us, somebody who could rise to the office of the president in order to betray us and to benefit them. During the Constitutional Convention, John Jay, who became our first Chief Justice, wrote to George Washington and suggested that the office of the president should never be allowed to descend to a person who was not a natural-born citizen. That made good sense to George Washington. The terminology, natural-born citizen, was well known to the founders. Most of them were familiar with Maire de Batel's tome, The Law of Nations, and you will read, oh, well, it was in French, and it wasn't translated into English until such and such a day. They all studied French, virtually all of them. And French philosophy, you really should read philosophy in French because it's easy to read. It's the language that was made for French. And even my high school French is enough to read the Law of Nations. And even if you didn't have French, you could really, the section on natural-born citizens is just so clear. Les citizens, blah, 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 but it's, you know, obviously two citizen parents born in the jurisdiction of the nation can't be anything other than a natural-born citizen. A lot of our founding fathers were lawyers. Lawyers studied the Law of Nations. And Ben Franklin brought copies of it to the convention. And it influenced not just the conditions for the president, but also other clauses. Most notably Article 1, Section 8, Clause 10, which empowers Congress to define and punish piracies and felonies committed on the high seas and offenses against the law of nations. They believed there was such a thing as the law of nations. We now call that international law. It's sometimes hard to enforce. You might wonder why the qualifications to be president are different from, probably nobody in this room, but qualifications for president are different from ordinary federal officers and state officers and judges who take an oath, but the oath is to support the Constitution. The president takes an oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. Because only the president serves as the commander-in-chief, and thus he is able to defend the Constitution with all the might of the American military. It's a unique position, and it's one that can require singular loyalty. For example, what is in the interest of the United States to sanction a nation that has dangerous weapons? Oh, but what if the president of that nation is his brother or his cousin? The kind of thing happened in Europe all the time. Our founders wanted this unique position to be one that required single-minded loyalty and avoided that kind of political intrigue. They believed that the natural-born citizen clause created the best barrier to dual loyalties a free nation can impose. And they certainly didn't see the presidency as an office everybody has a right to occupy. There is no right to be president, only qualifications. Instead, they saw the job as one that had high qualifications that would protect national security and benefit the American people. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, America began to disarm, like it did after every war, maybe not so wisely. We reduced military spending. We started spending the so-called peace dividend. Might have been nice if we paid off some of the debt. Our post-Cold War presidents were enthusiastic about globalization and pushed for larger trade organizations, international climate agreements, easier, freer immigration, and more open borders. Congress wanted to loosen our restrictive requirements for the presidency in order to make some popular politicians, Barack Obama, John McCain, eligible to be president. And they introduced at least 8 amendments to the Constitution. Most of the co-sponsors got fewer than 6. Most of the sponsors got fewer than 6 co-sponsors. Orrin Hatch got 20. And my good friend Barney Frank got only 1, his. Failing to change the Constitution the usual way, advocates of a more modern, more inclusive presidency began to say that it's no longer possible to get an amendment through the normal channels. America's just too polarized. Anybody heard that? People say you can't pass an amendment anymore. Well, you can't pass that particular amendment. You probably could pass some more wise amendments. Since 1791, we've only passed 17 amendments. And lots of them have been proposed. We're very picky about amending the Constitution. And of course, one of those amendments was rescinded. So we've really only passed 15 in 218 years. Long time. So instead of the Vattellian definition that a natural born citizen is a person whose parents are citizens, blah, 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 they repeatedly said that a natural born citizen is the same as a U.S. citizen. No difference. One person who was very frank about this was a writer in a Midwest law review who said, after all these efforts to get rid of this offending language, there's nothing else we can do except change the meaning of the words. So a little Orwellian. Her argument was that in a global world, it reflects badly on the United States to disqualify candidates whose very diversity makes them an asset to the country. Because members of Congress had failed to change the wording in the Constitution, she called for changing the meaning of the words themselves. Well, of course she did. And following that, we got a slew of legal opinions and articles basically saying, oh no, people misunderstand, natural born citizen means you're a U.S. citizen. The lawyers, at least, must have known what and that was picked up by the media and Wikipedia. Somebody's gotten a hold of Wikipedia and fixed that. I don't know how long it'll last, but the Vattellian definition of natural born citizen is now in Wikipedia as of yesterday morning. The lawyers knew what they were doing was wrong. History was against them. Never before 2008 did anyone run for the president knowing he was not a natural born citizen. The closest thing to somebody doing that prior to 2008 was Chester B. Arthur, who actually served as president when Garfield died. But there was this investigative reporter chasing him around, and the investigative reporter exposed the fact that Chester B. Arthur's father lied about the date on which he was naturalized. He was not naturalized before Arthur was born. So Chester B. Arthur, when he could have run for president, chose not to, and showed great integrity in doing that. And I'm sure his party was upset with him because he was a Republican and Cleveland won the next election. And the law is against them. This is what a unanimous Supreme Court said in its decision in Minor v. Happersett. Other Supreme Courts have made reference to it in just to sort of say, well, this person is a citizen, but they're not a natural-born citizen because. But that's not the same. Happersett, they actually set out the qualifications to be a natural-born citizen. It's straight out of Ameritta Patel. Quote, "The Constitution does not, in words, say who shall be natural-born citizens. Resort must be had elsewhere to ascertain that. At common law, with the nomenclature of which the framers of the Constitution were familiar, it was never doubted that all children born in a country of parents who were its citizens became themselves, upon their birth, citizens also. It was never doubted that all children in a country," did I repeat myself? I think I did. "These were the natives, or natural-born citizens." Finally, let me add that words in a constitution have meaning, and the founders who had experience writing constitutions would not have used natural-born citizen as a synonym for citizen if both meant the same thing. Citizen is used throughout the Constitution. Natural-born citizen is only used in Article 2 for the qualifications of the president. The members of Congress who proposed amendments to change the requirement that a person be a natural-born citizen in order to qualify for the presidency knew what the term natural-born citizen meant. And we also know that sometimes you type things up, they make no sense. Some people argue that natural-born citizenship should be determined by jus solus, based on the soil where the person is born. Others favor jus sanguinis, based on your blood relationship. You can get citizenship either way in the United States, but both are important to ensuring loyalty. I'll give you a for example. My mother's parents were U.S. citizens. When she was born, and she was very annoyed all her life. She was born in Scotland. She was annoyed all of her life that she was not eligible to run for the presidency. But when her daughter Fran ran for Congress, she was appalled. She said, we don't run for office in this family. What is this? This is a crazy idea. We're all going, we always thought she wanted to run for, or our mother wanted to run for president. I was born in Texas. I'm a military brat. I was born in Texas. I lived there 11 whole months. And all my life I've had sort of a little affection for Texas. And I couldn't wait to get there, and that's where I went to college after I escaped from New York. Where you're born has an appeal. And you form some attachments, and that's what the founders did not want to put up with. People need to be loyal to the place they're born. They need to be loyal to the country of their parents, and they usually are. And we call those natural-born citizens. If we look at what just happened in the last 10 years, the turmoil which was thrown into, first by concerns about Barack Obama's origins, since his father was not a citizen, and then by the suspicion that President Trump provoked during the campaign just by speaking well of Russia's President Putin, first president ever to speak well of another president, right? I think we should always be very suspicious of that. You're going to run foreign policy, you're probably going to have to say something nice about people every now and then. That's the way I think. But thank goodness he was not born on foreign soil, especially Russia's, and neither of his parents were Russian citizens. As we used to say when Nixon was president, the president has to be above suspicion. Not only does the natural-born citizen clause prevent real threats, it also keeps unnecessary suspicions at bay. The American people have to know with great confidence that their president has singular loyalty to their country, while the natural-born citizen qualification is not a certain preventative for treason. It is absolutely our best precaution against introducing foreign influences which could be dangerous. Here's your call to action. Get a bill introduced in the Georgia legislature requiring the Secretary of State to vet all candidates for constitutional eligibility. In fact, Georgia had such a bill. It was introduced in the 2011-2012 legislature, and too bad it didn't get out of committee. Probably the same people who want those unverifiable voting machines voted it down. And I'm trying to do the same thing in South Carolina. And I've got help with this throughout the nation. There are people who are extremely interested in this issue and would give you tremendous support. William Jeffery Olson, who's taken hundreds of cases to the Supreme Court. Herb Titus, who has those wonderful videos. He's a constitutional law professor, retired now. Wonderful videos on the internet on what is a natural born citizen. Very short, like 2-3 minute videos. Kevin, what is Kevin's last name? Oh dear, I can't remember. Young man from Georgia who took a case challenging Barack Obama's eligibility to be on the ballot in 2012 all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court dodged it because the man was already in office. And the court does not like to provoke crises, constitutional crisis. But there's no reason to think that the court wouldn't hear one before the fact. All of our efforts to deal with the Obama fraud were after he was already in office. Almost all of them, not every single one, but most of the serious efforts were focused on 2012. He was already president. I will be happy to share my bill, my friends, my lawyers, anything I can do to help you. It makes a huge difference in state legislation if more than one state is doing something. States don't act alone. They go and get ALEC to write their bills for them. They check and make sure their neighbors are doing the same thing, and voila, seems like a good idea. But when a state is trying to do it alone, it's hard. And look at how many states are doing this heartbeat? We're trying in South Carolina. I think there's a number. If Georgia was out there all by itself, I don't think that would have passed. But thank God it did. Any questions?